Our top focus in WION right now, there is growing pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to change course and accept a ceasefire deal in the 9-month-old war with Hamas militants. And in a bid to add pressure on Netanyahu to accept a truce deal, reports now suggest that Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant intends to make a public declaration outlining how Israel is within reach of a ceasefire and hostage deal. This comes after Hamas said that it is interested in the ceasefire deal and is only being jeopardized by Netanyahu's growing demands. Just a day ago, during the surprise visit to the troops in southern Gaza, Netanyahu made new demands regarding continued Israeli presence in the Philadelphia corridor. Take a listen.
אני רק התחזקתי פה מההישגים הכבירים שלהם. התחזקתי בהבנה שהפעולה העצומה שלהם מעל הקרקע ומתחת לקרקע חיונית לביטחון ישראל, והתחזקתי בהבנה שההחזקה שלנו בציר פילדלפי ובמעבר רפיח הם חיוניים להמשך. במקביל, הלחץ הצבאי שהם מפעילים כאן, ממש בגרון של החמאס.
Meanwhile, families of the Israeli hostages have been demonstrating for weeks, decrying Netanyahu's handling of the ceasefire talks and also calling him a saboteur.
אבא שלי נמצא בשבי חמאס. הוא נחטף בתחתונים וחולצה קרועה. הוא נמצא שם כבר כל כך הרבה זמן ואני פשוט מתגעגעת אליו. אני מפחדת שאם זה לא יהיה עכשיו זה יהיה לעולם לא. עכשיו זה הימים הקריטיים, והרי בסוף נגיע לעסקה, גם אם זה עוד 5 שנים וגם אם זה עוד 10 שנים. השאלה היא כמה נאבד בדרך, גם חיילים וגם חטופים. אסור לנו לאבד עוד מהם, לא חיילים ולא חטופים.
On the diplomatic front and in a major blow to Israel, the International Court of Justice, ICJ, has ruled that Israel's policies in the occupied Palestinian territory amount to annexation and has demanded that Israel's presence should come to an end as soon as possible. Netanyahu is also expected to travel to Washington, D.C. next week and meet with U.S. President Joe Biden. The two leaders have sparred over the issue of humanitarian aid disruption for Gaza and also the absence of an Israeli plan for the day after Hamas no longer controls Gaza. Talks are also expected to largely focus on a ceasefire deal as the U.S. continues to work with Qatar and Egypt to try to arrange a ceasefire in Gaza in order to free hostages which have been held since October 7th last year. And well, for more on this, we're now being joined by Professor David Dunn, Professor of International Politics in the Department of Political Science at the University of Birmingham, and he's joining us live from England. Welcome to the show, Professor Dunn. Now, Netanyahu is adamant on not reaching a ceasefire deal, and just a few days ago, he introduced new demands, while on the other hand, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has said that he will make a public statement that Tel Aviv is close to a ceasefire deal. We're also witnessing daily demonstrations by Israelis. How do you assess the current situation right now, where we are clearly seeing a scenario of Gallant versus Netanyahu versus the Israelis on the street?
What we've seen is the longer this war goes on, the less unified Israel is in its response to that. That is at a popular level, but it's also within the coalition government. And that is motivated by a deep suspicion of Netanyahu as to what his motivations are for his increasingly hard-line position towards Hamas. Now, as far as Netanyahu is concerned, he says that more military pressure will release the hostages, will kill all the Hamas fighters, but many people suspect that Netanyahu is prolonging the war in order to save his own position, because he personally is deeply unpopular in the country, and of course he faces criminal charges were he to cease to be Prime Minister over a variety of alleged crimes. So there is a degree to which trust and in Netanyahu is diminishing, and suspicion that actually he is pursuing the war for his own purposes are part of this. But the end of the war is we're really at that phase in some respects, and that the Israelis have destroyed Hamas in large parts of the country. The end game is always the more difficult part of any conflict, and there really is a fundamental disagreement as to whether a deal should be done to release the hostages, or whether, as in Netanyahu's view, they keep on fighting.
Right. Professor Dunn, you do speak of how Israel will be less unified if the war continues, and you also touched upon the motivations of the Israeli Prime Minister to prolong the war. Just to follow up on that, the Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, has said that the conditions have ripened for a ceasefire deal. Then why is Netanyahu not going forward with it? In your opinion, do you think Netanyahu is hindering progress for a ceasefire deal in order to perhaps retain the support of far-right elements of the coalition?
Yes, the Israeli politics is the government is a very broad coalition, but increasingly Israeli politics relies on extreme right-wing elements to keep those together. And they are very much how Netanyahu has come back to power as Prime Minister, by relying on those elements. And therefore, he feels the need to actually appease those elements within his war cabinet in order to keep that coalition together. And for his critics, he is more interested in keeping himself in power and the coalition together, rather than necessarily doing what's best in the national interest in terms of actually bringing the war to an end.
Right. We did discuss how Netanyahu is facing pressure in Israel, but there's also growing pressure abroad. Netanyahu is expected to meet with the U.S. president next week, with, of course, the overriding focus on ceasefire talks. While on the other hand, the ICJ has ruled that Israel's presence in Palestinian regions as unlawful. In your opinion, how do you see all of this alienating Netanyahu diplomatically when it comes to ceasefire talks?
Well, he certainly is a very controversial figure. Indeed, there are even reports in the US press that Biden is reluctant to stand down or announce that he's standing down in the coming presidential election, because he doesn't want to actually appear weak before he meets Netanyahu in Washington next week. And of course, in terms of actually the Americans would dearly like, the American administration would dearly like this war to come to an end, because it's damaging to Biden and the Democratic Party electorally to be supporting Netanyahu in what is a very controversial war in America, particularly among the left and the youth element of the American population, who Biden would rely on for re-election in November if it comes to it. So the visit of Netanyahu is high stakes and politically divisive. He will get probably a mixed reaction when he speaks to Congress next week, because he is seen as a divisive character and viewed by many as someone who is prolonging the war unnecessarily longly.
My last question to Professor Dunn. Let's also talk about the ICJ ruling. Do you see that ruling as a turning point in the ongoing war, and how perhaps will it impact Netanyahu's plan going forward?
Well, what Israel has said is that actually we can't be guilty of occupying what is our own country, and therefore they're taking a hard-line stance on this. Israel and indeed America are not part of the ICJ, and therefore they're happy to ignore it. But international opinion more broadly is very condemnatory of Israel. The British Foreign Secretary of the new Labour government, David Lammy, went to Israel last week and called for an immediate ceasefire. So the pressure is very much on Israel to do that, but so far Netanyahu is resisting that.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor Dunn, for joining us on the show with your insights on this.
Thank you.